Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. More fascinating development on next year's regulations, with Toto Wolff heavily implying that Mercedes might be in a particularly strong position compared to their rivals. Many of the drivers, having tried next year's cars in the simulators, are not especially happy about what they have found, and some teams are being very vocal about their disapproval. Mercedes, though, are saying, look, don't knock it until you've seen it on the track. Is that a heavy indication that they will be leading the way next year? Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Lots of quick updates today. It's not going to be the longest video ever because we are just about to get to another race week for finally a Grand Prix will return after this summer break. Couple of quick things. Haas, they've got an upgrade on the way. They've actually improved their car quite substantially this year. Now, I will say part of that is from Australia. And in Australia, they realised that they had an issue with their car, with their setup at those particular type of circuits that was causing them to be nowhere in pace. It's why when Sky Sports bring up these graphics that say how much the teams have improved over the course of the season in terms of raw pace, they're just fraudulent graphics because they compare it to the current race compared to Australia, and then they see where the teams have moved. But it's so race specific and so track dependent that analysis is kind of irrelevant, and it looks like, wow, it has to have improved so much, which in some regards they have, but also Australia was just so bad that there was always going to be some sort of a regression to the mean. Whatever, they've got an upgrade on the way. It's going to arrive in Austin. They're talking about this now. There was a rumour that they were bringing an upgrade, pretty much the only team that's actually doing anything to their car at the moment. And they said that it was going to be in Texas, Circuit of the Americas, and now, yeah, that is going to be happening. They're talking very optimistically that they will have a package ready. They are spending a lot of money on making it happen. They're confident it will help them climb the championship. And if they climb one place, then it will justify the expenditure. But also it means that they're going to be less focused on next year. Not that probably they care too much, because they're not expecting to be that competitive, I imagine, next year regardless. And they will take an awful lot from Ferrari. Now, everyone is telling us that Cadillac's driver lineup is set, so I guess we just kind of have to take it as fact at this point. Racing News say that Perez will be their other driver, Racing News 365. Perez and Bottas will be the driver lineup. Even Eric Van Haren today, who's of course the Verstappen guy. I mean, he's close to the Dutch Cam Verstappen, whatever. And he got some information from inside at Red Bull when Perez used to be there. He says Perez will return and Bottas will also make the comeback. So everyone's telling us it, not yet been confirmed. I think at this rate they will likely confirm both drivers at the same time. The rumour was that they would confirm Perez at the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. We'll see if they do that. We'll see if they confirm one before the other, because when everyone knows it, there's no real point being suspenseful. You might as well just confirm it, assuming of course it's true. The other key point is on two potential Grand Prix that want to come back in. We've talked about Turkey, we've talked about Portugal, Istanbul Park and Portimao respectively. Both apparently in negotiations. Malaysia, they were interested for Sepang to come back, but they were quoted 70 million euros and they were like, well, we can't really afford that. So we'll see if it makes sense. Portimao are interested. I think Turkey has a bit of a higher opportunity, like a slightly higher chance. That would just be my read, but definitely intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Couple of other updates around the world of F1. The regulations, we'll discuss them in a second. Vettel is keen for, presumably with sustainable fuels, a return to either naturally aspirated or turbocharged with maybe a small electrical component, but certainly not what we have today, V10 engine of some descript. It feels the general suggestion, even Ben Sulayem has made this very clear from the FIA's perspective, V10s are more likely. They're still, to some degree, road relevant. V10's less so it's going to be more challenging to convince the manufacturers that is the way to go. Vettel, though, says, I do think there's a generation growing up for whom the V10 sound is no longer as important, but who could still be excited by it. Like, the V10s didn't sound, or the V8s didn't sound bad either. Neither did the V12s. This is Bernie Ecclestone's opinion on the title fight. It is a big discussion of the summer break. Who's going to win the championship? 10 races to go, 3 sprints into the mix as well. Piastri's the favourite. He's leading the championship marginally. He's been the stronger of the pair this season. But it could all turn around. Only takes a DNF or Lando to finish ahead of Piastri a couple more times. All of a sudden that championship is looking a very different way. And, you know, there's still some debate on who's actually got more raw speed, whether it is still Lando or whether this year Piastri, with the, you know, the step that he's taken individually, but also the way the car suits both drivers, is in a much better position from a pure pace perspective. and on top of that has the mental edge as far as Eccleston is concerned. I think most fans would agree with this. Whether he's far superior mentally, I think that is a debate, but Eccleston says after 3 races, I bet on Piastri. He goes his own way and is mentally far superior to Norris. I don't think anyone's going to deny that, Piastri is superior mentally to Norris. Whether he's far superior, whether Lando's got on top of that a bit more, because, there have been Grand Prix this year. Hungary was a good example, but also, let's say, back in Monaco, or even back in Australia, where Lando held his nerve very impressively. So it's not like he's incapable of doing so. Piastri would be more consistent in doing so and executing the key moves when it matters. Bernie reckons he knows who's going to win the championship, though, so take that as you will. Let's talk Red Bull as we get into this Mercedes debate, because it's certainly not going away. Even though Horner is now gone, it doesn't mean that Toto Wolff doesn't still think about it at times. Lawson was given a few words on how things were under Horner. Of course, Lawson's been kind of critical of Red Bull after him getting dropped, and he was like, look, you put me on an experimental setup and it didn't work, and now you're going to blame me for that? Doesn't really seem too fair. Now, Helmut Marko is kind of the top dog. We talked about it the other day that Laurent Marquis is, yes, he's the team principal, but he's not been made a director of the company officially on Companies House. Instead, they've put their top HR guy in charge. They did that quite a while ago at the start of July, but still, the timing all kind of makes sense. But Marco, he is the director. He is the top dog, effectively, and he now gets to say what he wants because Christian Horner isn't there anymore. And he says, look, Marquis is doing a good job. He's worked long hours. He's focused technically. He's got strong leadership, saying that, the influence is being felt. So we'll see if that actually transpires on track. The reality is the car is going to be what the car is for the rest of the season. 2026 is going to be where Marquis will have had some impact, but as we know, the majority of next year will have been determined by Horner. Red Bull Powertrains, that's his operation. That engine department, we'll see what Marquis can do to try and turn the ship around and keep Max Verstappen happy, but there's probably only so much that he can do now that they've convinced Max to say. Toto even said he behaved like I'm not going to get demonetized for that, but I won't say it anyway, you guys can read it. Over the last 12 to 15 years, he operates under completely different values. But one of the big debates that Wolff and Horner were having was on the new regulations for 2026. Now, yesterday we talked about some interesting developments related to driving style and how certain drivers will probably enjoy the new cars more than the current ones, but also the top speed. We know that the cars are going to have about 30% less downforce, and when you hear 30% less downforce, you think, well, they're going to be a lot slower on a lap-by-lap basis. But then the FIA are telling us that actually, no, they're going to be 1 to 2 to 2.5 seconds a lap slower. So the conclusion to draw is that, yes, they will be a lot slower in the corners, but they will be potentially a lot faster in a straight line, or certainly out of corners in the acceleration phase to make up for a fair bit of that. So let's talk about it. Yesterday we discussed that the top speeds could get up to 400 kilometers an hour. We'll get to that in a second, but AMUS, they put an article out here, and I thought there were so many interesting things in this that we just had to go through it, especially with what some of the teams have to say. So James Allison at Mercedes, we talked about these quotes yesterday. The cars with a flat underbody and a step in the middle, it's more difficult to maintain a negative pressure zone under the car. The Venturi effect will be less. Nevertheless, they're not a replica of what we saw pre-2022. They're somewhere in between. Now, Mercedes don't seem exactly unhappy about that. The key point is, currently, the electrical component of the battery is about 150 horsepower, and the combustion engine produces 850 horsepower. Next year, it's going to be close enough to 50-50, right? The battery is going to deliver up to 475 horsepower, over triple what it currently delivers, and the combustion therefore is going to go down, but it's still going to be combined very powerful. Obviously, as we know, there's only so much electrical charge that can be delivered, and that means the cars are going to behave in a, let's say, to the drivers driving them for the first time, somewhat confusing and counterintuitive way, and we'll see what that looks like here in a second. But as a result of the electrical components being massive, it will simply run out of juice in a straight line if they don't reduce the downforce, which is why we've got the active aerodynamics, but that means that the downforce is going to be very low in a straight line, and as a result, the top speeds are potentially going to be very high. The record for top speed is Valtteri Bottas, 2016 Baku. He reached 378 kilometers an hour. I think there was an F1 car that went on some salt flats and did nearly 400. But apparently, Toto Wolff says, they will approach the 400 kph barrier, and maybe with slipstream and stuff, they could even get over it. We're talking 250 miles an hour. That's very quick. If the active aero fails when you try and brake to the corner and you end up trying to brake to the corner with not the downforce you expect, that could be a problem. If the tyres explode, that could be a problem, right? Like, the more speed you add in, the more danger is inherent in, it's just physics, right? Now, Drogovic said yesterday the car pushes like crazy out of corners. You feel like you're sitting on a rocket. But what's interesting about this is that the 400 kph limit, typically we see the speed trap be set towards the end of a straight as to pretty much when the car is going to get to their top speed. You'll often see in F1 nowadays, the cars will not be at their top speed just at the braking points because there is inevitably some sort of derating of the engine. Now, we see this currently in the form of what we tend to call clipping, which is where the car will use its battery and use its ICE to get to top speed, and then the battery will run out of juice, and it will only be powered by the combustion engine, and it will end up actually clipping off the top speed towards the end of the straight. Now, that currently is an effect, but it's not really that noticeable, right? But next year it will be very noticeable. The point is that you might get to 400 kph, but you won't do so at the end of the straight. You will get to that point maybe halfway down the straight because your acceleration will be insane, and then you're going to run out of juice and you're going to effectively coast until the braking point. Now, the FIA are trying to control for this by saying, all right, yes, you can use all of that power, but you can only use it at a certain rate. You can't just dump the battery in a second. You have to dump it over a certain period, and that's the type of stuff that they're working on to keep this reasonable. As you can tell, it's very complicated. It's not just stick a V8 in the car and drive it fast. There's a lot going on here, and it may be too much. The drivers aren't that happy about it. Now, I will say James Vowles made it kind of clear that whatever the drivers say in their first couple of instances driving it, give them 5 or 6 times in the sim for next year, then see what they think after that. But many of the drivers have been quite critical, right? Charles Leclerc, now Hamilton said it's different, so good, which makes sense from Hamilton's perspective right now. Leclerc goes, though, it's no fun. I can't imagine how you would race in this, because I understand the idea. If I'm bombing it up to top speed within the first half of the straight, sitting on a rocket, and then my car is just slowing down until the end, I might even have to downshift to keep up some sort of revs. Am I going to race a guy like we're both decelerating into the braking zone, as even though we've both got our foot flat to the floor while we're racing? It would be kind of strange. And Leclerc says it's no fun. I can't imagine how you'd race in it. Max Verstappen says it's unusual. We're also, though, at an early stage of development. Max and Horner were extremely critical of these regulations, certainly the engine regulations, quite a while ago, when they were, coming up with these ideas about, well, at Monza you're going to run out of energy on the straight. And there's been ways that they're trying to resolve that, but it's still not clear that they'll be able to do so fully. But Toto Wolff is pretty adamant that we just need to see how it goes. And I think his position is probably fair and reasonable. But, if you look at Max has been pretty negative about the new regs. Horner was very critical of the new regs in every regard, aero and also engine mode. So just the contrast there between Toto saying, it's going to be fine. I don't know what you guys are talking about. How can you criticize something that hasn't even been fully developed yet, says Toto Wolff. And Domenic Carney, obviously, because he works for Liberty Media, says it'll be a different driving experience, but it doesn't necessarily mean worse. We will all get used to it quickly. So I guess that's a real sign of confidence, real vote of confidence there. Now, Alex Albon was talking about a few things. James Allison says, though, the handling will be more pleasant than the current cars. There'll be less shift between understeer and oversteer. We talked about that yesterday. And Albon says that the drivers are going to be more relevant now because there's so many other things to handle. Drogovic says it's really fun in the corners because the high electric component means there's always power. The sudden drop in power on the second half of the straight takes some getting used to. And Vowles, this is the comment that I actually mentioned, listen to the drivers that have done several sessions. And Albon says in 2026, you'll have much more say in how best to use the power and how to charge the battery most efficiently. Whoever best understands the interrelationships and derives the right things for them will have an advantage. This influence is intended by the regs. The FIA wants the driver to play a greater role against. That's an interesting analysis on this, right? The deployment of the battery is much more critical now. It's not just on or off and it makes some small difference. It makes a massive difference. If you have more battery than the opponent you're racing against does, because you've saved it up better and you've deployed it where necessary through the corners, and when you deploy it, it makes a big difference, that could be a big advantage. So there's this opinion poll. I mean, I don't really know how you exactly vote in this. I've been dragging this number around, but wherever I put it, it seems, most people seem to say that this might be the way to go. Everything used to be better. I want V10 engines back. I'm kind of somewhere more in the middle here, really, but I'm kind of more on this side, I suppose. Anyway, intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. The regs are not yet set in stone. They go on to describe how you went into the wind tunnel early and consistently, says Vowles. Such actions can set you back more than the teams that switch to the new cars later. Making the point that because the engines aren't finalised, it actually is almost having a disadvantage if you started too early because they're then making changes. Now, the things are, fundamentally finalised, but they're just making small adjustments, which means it could be problematic. So this is what we mentioned, how if you deploy 350 kilowatts all at once, then yeah, that's going to be insane. So they're not going to be able to do that. And Bonotto, for example, said that the excessive horsepower must be prevented on street circuits. Otherwise, we'll be driving through the tunnel in Monte Carlo at 350 kilometers an hour, which is kind of absurd to think about, right? Like 350 kph. Those are the kind of top speeds we get to at Monza each year. And you're saying that potentially in Monaco, if there's nowhere else to deploy the battery, right, it's a fair point. You're not using the battery for the rest of the lap at Monaco, so the only time to use it really is out of the, the corner on the run down into the tunnel. So if you just drop the whole battery pack there, you're going to be going at like an insane rate of knots, which probably is going to be way too much. So that's what the article has to say. I think it's pretty interesting to hear what these developments look like, what the certain teams have to say. But as you can tell, James Vowles, Mercedes powered, isn't going to be too unhappy about it, and Toto Wolff is being pretty adamant that no, this is great, we need to see how it goes, right, before we start to criticise. So I think it's pretty clear that these guys are playing the politicking game, and I think Toto Wolff has good reason to be optimistic in the future for Mercedes. So intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. There are a couple of stories emerging as well about Mercedes and Toto Wolff and Sebastian Vettel all those years ago. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.